Let's talk about JavaScript. Do you know how to create a list of elements in JavaScript? What data structure, if we have a basket, we go to Tesco tonight, we want to buy apples, oranges, and bananas. Which data structure in JavaScript facilitates that task? Array, correct, that's correct. So let's create an array. Let fruits. What's the symbol identifying arrays? Square bracket. Well done, guys. So we got apples, oranges, and bananas. Yeah, very healthy basket today. Cool. So if I want to determine how many elements I have in my basket, how do we check the size of the array? Say it again? Index, right? I type index. No, index is not defined. Fruit.length, I love that. Fruit.length, correct. So if we type fruit.length, returns 3. You can see that at the bottom, right? Unsurprisingly. And what happens if we want to get the first element of the array, the first element we add to the basket? How do we know which one it is? How do we access it?
Usually index a number.
Index a number. How do we do that?
0 in a curly bracket.
Like that? Yeah. Correct. Makes sense. And if I want to access the second element of the array, 2?
Sorry, 1.
1? Correct. Because JavaScript is 0 based. The first element is not 1. It's 0. Yeah. There are some exceptions. Once you start dealing with intermediate training and you work with dates, which is always a controversial topic and a complex one, dates, add one day, remove 1 month, all these sort of operations, you'll realize how exotic sometimes JavaScript is, because days are start from 1, the first day of the month, day 1, makes sense, but months start on 0. Why? Classic JavaScript, yeah? Luckily, fortunately, in the recent versions of JavaScript, they've made a lot of efforts to minimize the number of inconsistencies. But of course, we still have to deal with classic JavaScript for compatibility reasons. All right, and what if I want to access the last element of the array? 2. All right, 2 will work as soon as we got 3 elements. But what happens if we got a pineapple? Fruits 2 won't return the last element of the array. Richard? Fruits dot length. Why minus 1, Richard? Second?
The second one or the last one?
The last one.
Because it's 0 based.
That's correct. So what fruits dot length will return, guys? 4. Correct. Correct. But because of JavaScript is 0 base, this is index 0, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah? So if we got 4 elements, the last index is 3. Does it make sense? So Richard is right. That returns the last element. That algorithm is dynamic. It doesn't matter how many elements our basket has. If we got 2 elements, that should work. What happens if we forget to add the minus 1? What will that algorithm return? Undefined. That's correct. That's correct. Why? Because fruits.length returns 2. What do we got on index number 2? Index number 0, apples, index number 1, oranges, index number 2. There is nothing. Nothing on the right hand side. Then return undefined. Yeah? So generally speaking, junior developers are tempted to say it returns nothing, which is correct, it's nothing. But the technical way to describe nothing in JavaScript is undefined. Yeah? later on in the course we'll learn the differences between undefined, null, all these things. There are some subtle differences, but generally speaking, nothing means undefined. Any questions so far? No? What happens if I want to flip the array? In other words, first I added the apples and then oranges and then bananas, but I realized that the elements in the basket, it's not a good idea to put the bananas on top of the apples. That's a bit weird example, but I hope you get the idea, right? So you empty the basket and you fill it again, but you want to switch the order. So the first element should be bananas, the second one should be oranges, and the last one should be apples. How do we do that? Dot reverse, fantastic, Parik, correct. Fruits dot reverse, correct. Yeah, array dot reverse, fruit dot reverse. So that will flip the elements of the array. See, now bananas comes first and apples comes last. Makes sense, right? Do you have any questions? No? And what happens if we add apples, oranges, and bananas, but then after some time we add the fourth element? We want to add pineapples. How do we add pineapples here, 2 lines below, to the array? Push, fantastic. Pineapples, yeah? Correct. So now, yeah. So ignore that number. Let me display the fruits. Yeah, correct. We got pineapples. And what if in reality we don't want to add pineapples at the end of the array? We want to add pineapples on top, on the first element. Unshift, fantastic. So if we do unshift, pineapple should be the first element, as you can see. Yeah? And what if instead of adding, we realize that we forgot our wallet at home, we just have £3, so we need to remove something from the basket. What if we want to remove bananas from the list? Pop, fantastic. So if we run pop, you see only apples and oranges. And likewise, what happens if in reality, what we want is to remove the first element of the array? Shift, that's also correct. Oranges and bananas. So we've seen how to add elements to an array, push at the end, and shift on top, and how to remove elements on an array. Shift on top and pop at the end. Yeah? So these are the basics. And then if I want to edit, instead of oranges, I want to replace it, right? I don't want to remove or add, I don't want to change the size of my list. I just want to update the second element. How do we replace oranges with pineapples? Splice. We'll talk about the splice in the future. No, splice is a very powerful mechanism to work with arrays, but I don't want to go that deep today. This is just an overview. This is a simpler way to update an element of an array. Yeah? Do you remember how to access the second element of an array? Say it again? Index, okay, so how do we do that? I want to display oranges. How do we do that? Correct? So that will return oranges. It will read the content of the second element of the array. And similarly, we can do that, which is pretty sexy, right? And predictable. Here you reassign the second fruit in the basket. So if we now display the list of fruits, it will return apples, pineapple, and bananas. Here you go. Yeah? So that's the most simplistic way to operate with arrays. We'll see in the future, not today, What happens if I want to add an element? I want to add pinnacles between the first and the second, not at the beginning, not at the end, something somewhere in between, right? Not today, not today. We'll talk about splice, as some of you suggested in a future session. Any question, guys, regarding arrays? Arrays is, without hesitation, the most powerful data structure in JavaScript. Once you start dealing with expert, intermediate as well, but mainly expert training, you'll see that regardless what the question is, your first attempt will be to transform the data into an array. Because with arrays, we can do many things. Let me give you an example. Imagine that we want to check if we already added oranges to our basket. Let me create a function. Function, do I have oranges? Yeah, so instead of fruit, let me call it basket. And I'm going to invoke the function. And that function should tell me whether I have oranges or not, true or false. How will we do that? It's not obvious, right? But in JavaScript, there are different ways to do that. One of them, and Gray will explain that literally tomorrow morning, is find. Find is a very useful method that helps to identify whether an element is part of an array or not. For instance, we can do return. Look at the syntax. Again, Gray will explain it tomorrow. Basket.find, which feels very natural. And then that's the tricky part, so pay attention. Inside of the parentheses, we pass a function, and that function will be executed as many times as elements our basket has. In here, we'll pass the fruit. So fruit will be first apples, then on the next iteration will be oranges, and on the last iteration will be bananas. So in here, we decide whether that fruit is the one we are looking for or not. So we set a condition, return fruit equal oranges. So if I have any oranges, that function will spot it. You see? Return oranges because it's on the list. What happens if I remove oranges from the list? Then the function will return undefined. You see? So find will try to identify whether that condition is true or not. So if I add a breakpoint on line number 5, how many times do you think the code will stop in there? Twice, that's correct. Look, once was the value of fruit, apples. Is apples equal to oranges? It's not, right? Should we use double equals or triple equals? Triple, fantastic. So that expression returns true or false? False, correct. No problem at all. We continue. We keep going on the next iteration. Next iteration, the value of fruit is bananas. Is bananas equal to oranges? False, correct. That returns false, so we keep checking. Is there any other fruit in the basket? No. So when find is unable to identify your item, it returns undefined.
Question.
Yep.
What would you write in the code if you wanted to display a message like no?
Okay, that's a good question. What if instead of undefined we want to display you don't have any orange or yes you do have oranges? That's a good question. We can do that. So we can create a variable oranges, yeah, and I assign the result of invoking do I have oranges. And now I can do an if else. Do you remember on Monday, in the coding challenge? Yeah? So if I have oranges, then what? We can do a console.log. Yes, you have some oranges. Alternatively, if I don't have oranges, console.log, no, you do not have any. Does it make sense, Iwan?
Yeah, I was just going to also add where you just put fruits after find fruits.
Yeah, so that
What you're saying there, why not just put find oranges?
here,
Like variables.
yeah, because again, that function will run as many times as elements our array has. And each time we run that function, we'll assign each individual elements, first of all apples, second of all bananas, we'll assign these values into that variable. That's the way we can inspect if apples is what we are looking for or if bananas is what we are looking for.
That's the best way to remember that.
Yes, of course. The good thing is the majority of the methods in JavaScript on arrays, they have the same API, the same look and feel. So once you get familiar to that syntax, it's all about the same. Yeah? What happened if I'm looking now, let me rename the function. Instead of oranges, well, let's see if that works, first of all, right? With the if else that Iwan suggested. So if we run the snippet, we don't have any oranges in the basket. We agree on that, right? So if we run it, it should display, no, you don't have any. Here you go. You see? If I do have an orange, then now if we run the snippet again, oranges in plural, you see? It didn't found it because I was checking plural, but I got a single one. So let's match the strings. Correct. Yes, you have some oranges, right? So that's the way the process define works. What happened, guys, if I have oranges in between of apples and bananas? Again, breakpoint on line number 5. You will see on the next weeks that will give you points sometimes when you give right answers. You remember the board challenge? So on the board challenge, every time you participate, you get a score. We'll share the score every week with you. On top of the points you get in the board challenge, you get extra points when you provide valuable answers. Why we do that? Because again, the employers are very interested in see how much you participate on this type of events. So, I'll tell you something. There are 2 points for the first person who is able to tell me how many times the snippet will stop on line number 5. Who said 3? Iwan, I'm not going to say if it's right or wrong. Let's just type some options, right? So Iwan said 3. You can agree or disagree. Patrick said 2. Richard?
Can I readjust that?
No. A basic rule in these challenges is once you share your thoughts, you cannot change them. Yeah? Why? Because we want you to think twice before participating.
How about moving on to the end where it was before?
All right.
He wants to hack the code.
Patrick and Richard said 2.
I see 2 as well.
Abdul, I'm interested to see obviously a nice opinion. 2, all right. If any of these blocks is right, this is E1 versus the wall essentially, right? So if multiple members are right, the points go to the first one, in which case is Patrick. All right, so let's see who is right. Iteration number 1, fruit, apples, 1. Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Sorry guys. Do you remember I told you yesterday, if you're running a snippet, don't run it again. Look, even it changed color, right? Something completely dark is happening. So yeah, we need to try to kill that. Sorry, let me complete that and let's try again. All right, let's try again. Let's start again, guys. So line number 5, 1, fruit, apples, no problem at all. 2, fruit, oranges. And now, according to E1, it will stop again. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, let's go. Ooh, it didn't stop again. In other words, Patrick, Richard, Abdul, and Anais were right. What that means, find stops as soon as the element you're looking for is matched. Yeah, that's very nice. There is a similar method called filter, but I'm not going to talk about filter now because otherwise I'll spoil too much what Gray will be talking. But filter is very similar. So if you understood that, it will take you 30 seconds to understand filter. I'm not going to give you the answer, but out of curiosity, feel free to go to DevTools and play a bit. I think it's a good exercise. Right, so that's about arrays. We got 10 minutes, so let's talk about objects, which are a very important, probably the most important data structure after arrays. So, what's an object? Can anyone tell me what an object is in JavaScript? A collection. Key values, fantastic, is what it is. So, we have an object of a character who is in London at the moment. First name is Donald, last name is Trump, and then age, how old is this guy? 71 or 72, right? Cool, fantastic. So this is an object, key value, key value, key value. How do we check the last name of our character? That's correct, guys. Character dot last name. Fantastic. And can we have nested objects? Look at what I'm doing now. Name, first, last. You see the idea, right? I got nested objects. How now do we check the last name of our character? Correct, character.name.last, that's correct, Patrick. So you see that you can drill down, you can navigate, yeah, using the dot notation. That's correct. And let me go back to the previous one. How do we get the keys of my character? First name, last name, and age. Character.keys. So there are two options. Anais, who is already regretting, is already giving up with that approach. So she said character.keys. And then Richard said object, is capital or lower O? Capital O, correct. Object.keys, and then character. So, Richard is essentially right. What's the problem with that approach? JavaScript will try to find a key called keys. Yeah? In other words, if I do that, you see what I mean? Then it will work. Well, it will work. It will return something. It won't return what we expect, but at the least it will return some values. Open and close brackets after keys. And then what? No.
Character.keys, open and close bracket.
Parentheses. Like that.
Yeah.
Correct. So, what happened in that case? That's a good question. Look, does anyone know? So there are, for Patrick, there are 1.5, is it 1.5 or 2? 2 points, right?
2 points.
2 points. So you cannot participate in that question. But for the rest, we got characters.keys, open and close parentheses. There are another 2 points for the first person who tells me what will that line number 8 return. So, Abdul said all the keys. First name, last name, and age. And Ace,
I think it will return Donald Trump and Zilpha.
Ewon, so Richard,
I think we'll say keys method is not defined.
Richard said error. One of you, is it good, right? I like when, well, I find particularly interesting when everybody has different opinions, yes? Because that means that everyone apart from one will learn something new, right? And so everyone is wrong apart from Richard, yeah? What's the problem? What character.keys will return? Correct. We don't have any keys properly in our object, right? We agree on that. Yeah. We only have first name, last name, and age. We don't have any keys. So character.keys will return undefined. What happens in JavaScript if you try to execute undefined? It blows up. It destroys your laptop. Yeah? Well, hopefully not. But you get the idea, right? That's not legal in JavaScript. If I run that code, characters.keys is not a function. Because of that, I cannot run it. Look, DevTools is highlighting the issue, right? Okay, so that's not the correct way to get the keys.
But is that not contrary to the principle of JavaScript? Because when you say let character be equals to I believe, looking at it, I believe that the character object is actually created at the background.
No, listen, the character object is actually created. Yeah. That's not the problem. Character is fine. The problem is you try to access a property that doesn't exist. We don't have any keys property in that object, so that returns undefined. The highlighted text returns undefined. Then we're trying to run a function on undefined, which doesn't make sense.
But the keys method is a method within the global object.
Right. So, okay, that is an interesting point. 2 weeks before the end of the bootcamp, we'll talk about something very sexy called prototypal inheritance. In that case, we'll do a special workshop in that corner where we draw some boxes about how JavaScript inherits properties. So I don't want to explain that at the moment because this is going to be quite confusing, right? But yeah, we'll talk about that in the future. It's a good point. It's definitely a very interesting discussion. Yep.
Can you explain the difference between saying character dot first name and character square bracket first name? Because I always get
Yes. Let me go back to that after completing that example. Yeah, that will be actually the last example of the day. Unfortunately, on the last question, no one got points. No, actually, yes, Richard got points. Sorry, Richard. So, Parek and Richard. All right, so, yeah, with object.keys, again, know the capital O. Yeah, that's important. Gives you the keys. What type of data that line will return? That's correct, an array of keys, of strings. And what if instead of the keys, I want to access the values? Object.values, that's correct. Yeah? Likewise, it will give you the values. Surprisingly, even though that looks very fundamental, that's a new thing in JavaScript. It's like 2 years old. Before 2017, it was much more complicated to access the values of an object. Yeah, but now, luckily, everything has evolved. Right, so now let me present the last problem based on Anna's suggestion. So I'll keep my object, but I want to have a function called function get first name. So we got the object, and that function should return the first name of the character, right? Do you get the idea, right? So if I invoke it, it should return Donald. What do we need to do to complete the exercise?
So what do you want to know?
I want to return Donald. Return where? Line number.
I would think it, oh yeah, actually, I don't know. I think it'll be after the semicolon on line 7.
Like that?
Yeah.
Return what?
Return character dot first name.
Character dot first name. Yeah? I hope you agree on that because Patrick is right. And what if instead of the first name we want to return the last name? Let's rename the function get last name return the same thing, right? Character dot last name. And it works. And what if instead of the last name we want to return the age? Get age. So we can have multiple functions to return different aspects of our character. That's okay. It works, right? It works.
But what if you remove the gets age?
Yeah.
You remove the open and close bracket.
Yeah.
Line 11.
Line 11, yeah.
Remove that
Yeah.
and execute it.
Ah. What will that algorithm return? Okay, let's add some points, 2 points for either Iwon, Anais, or Abdul. So Abdul,
Error.
71. Iwon, error. And Anais? Right. I'm afraid to say that you are all wrong. So that's either, and there are no points for you, either Richard or Patrick. Say yes, anything? Right. So Iwon and Patrick, after saying that was not correct, he's still thinking it will return an error.
Gives you a function.
So Richard, oh sorry, I clicked somewhere. Richard says that returns the function. And Richard is right. In here, we are not executing the function. We are only returning a reference to that highlighted code. In other words, if we execute it, it just displays the function, but it does nothing, just the text. That's why it's very important, whenever we want to execute a function, to drop the parenthesis after the function name. With the parenthesis, it will actually execute the function.
So go past the semicolon. If you put the parentheses.
No, it's not the same. Again, semicolons are completely out of the discussion.
On line 7,
On line 7.
you'll go past that.
No. If we don't execute the function, look,
Where's it go?
where does it go? How many times line number 3 will run? So, E1 said that it will run once. Patrick said 2.
0 times.
Abdul, 0.
You need to keep it like as it is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Abdul, why 0?
Because you just synced, isn't it? It just went through.
That's correct.
It looks like there was no execution.
That's correct. Abdul is right. The code will never ever jump here because we are not executing that function. Look, I can run it. You don't see that, but it's not stopping at all.
So what just happened there?
Nothing. You created a function. That's it, right? You didn't invoke it at all.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll see next month that we can introduce some linting rules. Do you remember the elegance console in the Codere platform? The elegance console will throw a warning. Will say, hey guy, how are you today? You created a function called getAge, but you are not invoking it. Warning, penalty, red text on the screen, right? So that doesn't make sense.
So what do we just do then? We just like write the name of the function. Is that
You
what-
correct? Yeah, yes, the name of the function, correct? Like, hey, yes, that's the name of the function. It will return the content, but it won't execute it.
Oh, it returns the content. but
The content, exactly.
See that again, just the content.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a reference. I mean, when I see the content, this is not a string. This is just, it's hard to explain. It's nothing. This does absolutely nothing. You created a function and then you try to return a reference to the function. This is even hard to explain because it's something that happens under the hood in memory. But the function is not run at all. Nothing is executed. Yeah. At the end of the bootcamp, we'll talk about advanced techniques to invoke functions, and I like to go back to that strategy. But until then, never do that. Every time you want to invoke a function, parentheses. Yeah? Right, we are out of time, but before finishing, back to Anai's question, you can see I can create three methods, one to return the first name, one to return the last name, and one to return the age. But would it be possible to do that? Get attribute, for instance. So then I want to go to invoke get attribute first name. So that should return the first name of the character. Or last name, that should return the last name of the character. Or age, and that should return the age of the character. You see the idea, right? So I want to dynamically access each individual property without having to write 3 or 4 or 10 functions to do something very similar. So if we got the key here, will be first name, will be last name, or will be age, how do we dynamically return the value associated to that key? I think Anais knows the answer already. You got what?
I got lost in the explain.
You got lost understanding the problem. Right. So what you need to do, Iwan, is go to the Codere platform, beginner objects, because there is one question number 3, where we literally cover that problem. So go to question number 3, try to solve it, and if you struggle, let me know and let's do pair programming. Yeah? Everyone else, do you understand the problem?
Is that the training thing?
That's a training, correct. There is a question that literally is about that. So how do we dynamically do that?
So that's when you would say character square bracket.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. 99% of the time, you'll be using the dot notation to access the value of that key. That's fine. But in some cases, in reality, you want to dynamically, at runtime, decide which key do you want to access. Please know the square bracket notation. So that means check, that's the same as doing this, guys. Yeah, you see? So that will return 71. That's it. Or doing that. That will return Donald. That's it. Or that one. That will return Trump. Yeah, that's the same. If you know which property you want to access, that feels a bit dodgy. I wouldn't do that. If I know I want to return the last name, I will simply do dot last name. Yeah, feels a bit more natural. But if you don't really know, you want to make it flexible, then you can replace the string with the key. So that will return 71 because we want to get the key. And if I pass first name, that will return Donald. And if I put last name, that will return Trump. Yeah? That's the way you dynamically decide which property you want to return. And what happened, very last question of the day, if I put the email? Undefined. Well done, guys. Correct. Because JavaScript will inspect that list of keys, and because we don't have any email of that person, JavaScript will simply return undefined. Yeah? So if we run that, here we go. We get our sexy undefined at the bottom. Questions?
But then you were able to actually get one of the values for the object, even when the function you did not specify a parameter. You pass an argument
Yeah.
to the function,
Yeah?
but when you were defining the function,
Yeah?
you did not specify the
Yeah, I did. The key.
That was empty.
That was empty.
Yeah, there was nothing there.
Has been there for 20 minutes.
No, if you remove the key there.
If I remove the key, yeah?
Yeah.
Then what?
Yeah, and then you scroll down,
Yeah?
and then you put maybe first name.
Here.
When you call the
No.
When you call the
Here.
yeah,
All right.
first name, and then you execute and it works.
No. That won't work. Why you say that works?
Because I just saw how it worked.
You saw it where?
It worked before you.
No. And the way to prove that this session is recorded, so you can rewind, and please let me know at what time that code worked.
If you just go back to as it was before,
Yeah, sorry. Before changing anything, let's prove this doesn't work, right? You see, it throws an error. Key is not defined, of course. To use the key, we have to pass it. If you don't like the word key, you can rename it with Abdul if you want. That's fine. It will work, as you can see, but you definitely need to bind it. Otherwise, the variable is undefined and it will throw an error. So, Iwan.
I was just going to say, if you put get attributes Abdul on line 11,
Get attributes. Abdul, all right. Yeah. So, what will it return? That's the same as the email, right?
yeah,
Undefined, because we don't have any Abdul property here.
and if it wasn't in quotations, but
If it wasn't in quotation like that, what will that return? Error, that's correct. Because in line number 11, on that scope, Abdul is not defined. Look, you see? Abdul is not defined, literally what they said. Yeah? Abdul is defined here, but not there. So in here, we should pass a string of the property we want to access. And now, it will simply give you the value associated to that key. So,
the value is the
so I didn't get the question, Iwan.
Is
Yes, correct. Here you pass the key and the function will return the value associated to that key. Yep. Again, it's based for everyone. JavaScript beginner training, objects, very important, especially question number 3. We covered that problem. All right? Anything else, guys? No? Fantastic. Thank you very much.